Welcome. I'm going to do my best to look at the camera right here and to read something on my other monitor up here, which says, look at my eyeballs dancing around. Welcome to the Game Audio Hour. It's number 106. It's like almost like a Roland number. If it was maybe 5 less or maybe 600, like 500 more, it would be a Roland number, but it's not quite. It's 106. And this is a weekly podcast where we discuss all things game audio. And I'm just kind of, my camera's actually up here, so I'm looking at you now. From creative ideas to the latest techniques, project experience to audio secrets, here's where you'll find in-depth coverage and opinions related to why is Kyle Johnson not here today. This is the issue that we have congregated here today to discuss. For maybe 10 seconds before we get into game audio, the magnanimous, gregarious, illustrious Kyle Johnson sadly is not able to be with us today, so you have to put up with us three stooges.
Can I be Curly?
So let's go straight across to Curly. How are things over there in Curly Land, Curly?
Get it? I'm Curly? No. Yeah, it's always sad to not see Kyle here, but apparently he's just getting old. And it's up to us to take the mantle from him. We're going to push on forward because there's so much to talk about in the audio world, and we will do our best. Kyle is cool, but he's old. Out with the old.
That's cruel. No, the real reason that Kyle Johnson is not able to be with us today is he's a little bit under the weather, but that's okay because there are many people under the weather. If the weather is the sky, there's quite a few people under the weather, and one of those fantastic people is Michael Shapiro. That doesn't work. How are you, Mike?
Doing really well. That was a wonderful transition there. I'm doing fine. Speaking of the weather, it's outside is roughly equivalent to the surface of the sun right now. So I'm very happy to be inside, and life is good.
Excellent. So let's dig right into it. So first up, as you can see, I'm doing my very best to be a substitute for the wonderful Kyle Johnson. So I'm going to sort of not try too hard with the segues today, and we're just going to talk. Just good old-fashioned talking. So let's start with E3. So last week was E3, or is it still going on? Is it over?
It's over.
It is done.
Okay. E3's over. Oh. So last week was E3, and I wanted to ask you guys whether there were any trailers or any things. Were either of you guys there? Because that's just like next door for you, isn't it?
It is indeed. It's just a medium duration subway for me. I try not to bring a car into downtown LA, especially around E3 time, so it's... Public transportation does exist in LA, contrary to stereotype, so it's conveniently nearby.
Mm-hmm. Did you go?
No, I'm kidding. I did go.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay.
I did. It's fun, but I feel like as the years have gone on, the benefits you get from going to E3 as opposed to sitting at home in your nice air-conditioned, broadband-equipped computer chair and watching all the press releases, the ratio has kind of leveled out because E3 is exceedingly crowded, and a lot of the really cool stuff now requires getting online for multiple hours, thus dedicated is the fan base. And some demos are reserved for the press. There's kind of an exclusive upper crust to a lot of what the developers and publishers want to show off. So if you really just want a sense of immersion in the industry and to maybe get a chance to play a little bit of some games or to see a demo up close, and you have a good, comfortable set of sneakers and time to kill, it's fun. But informationally, it feels like it's less useful these days than it has been in past years.
What's changed? Is it just more emphasis on marketing and big sort of, Native Instruments storm drums or whatever it was? And
I don't know if it's really changed so much as it's a connection to the industry as it has been. E3 has traditionally been about connecting publishers and retail. And that's fine. It's still a wonderful place for connecting publishers and retail, except now you're sort of trying to shoehorn in this other stuff. Like at this particular E3, there are now actual fans not connected to retail, not connected to the press that are coming in and having fun. And I guess you can have fun waiting in line for Zelda for 4 hours, sure. But the industry itself has changed. We're not stuck in that model. That E3 is a reflection of. E3 is really not that far off from the E3 of 1999 and 2000. So it's still cool. Publishing is still relevant. Retail is still relevant. I think actually in this crazy world of Steam and the App Store and anything is everywhere, and you've got little guys that are able to make these amazing games that are competing with the AAA guys. Retail is actually a really useful place for research, and I'll just go to GameStop and be like, oh, here's something I didn't hear about, because in the world of the internet, it's hard to have those directed venues and vehicles for getting our eyeballs anymore. So, it's it's an interesting place, E3. I like it for what it is, but it also seems like it's not really that huge a part of us anymore.
There's also an element of E3 from past years that made it not so much informationally useful, but in terms of sheer spectacle, a little more fun than it is now. It was kind of like the fall of the Roman Empire. The environment was getting increasingly crazy in ways that were both good and bad. What was bad were noise levels, and some have argued about the taste of the infamous booth babes, who were essentially models that were cart-loaded in and put into costumes for games of which they had no knowledge or understanding, and they'd stand around and be models. But on the other hand, there was a kind of fun side to all the excess, where there was just kind of a spectacle to the whole thing. I remember one year they had Mutator, which is basically a rave band, huge, large-scale rave band with rows of percussionists and like 5 lead guitarists and fire jugglers, a little slice of Burning Man right there in the middle of the convention center. And I don't even remember what game they were promoting, which means I guess it was sort of a failure from the standpoint of being a promotion, but it was a lot of fun. And you'd often see things like that that would provide kind of a carnival-like atmosphere. And it would give another reason to go in person, if not an enlightened educational reason.
I get the same feeling about Tokyo Game Show. It seems like Tokyo Game Show may be what E3 is in about 5 years. Or maybe not. Maybe E3 you still get the smaller games at E3, right? Like the smaller studios, you still get to play their games, right?
Kind of. I mean, there are some small games there, but that's because you have some specific booths that are dedicated. Well, just a few things. There will be little games that are connected with the big services, like it's PlayStation Network, so you can see 1 or 2 kiosks over at the Sony booth. You do have Indiecade, which is actually a really cool place because you are guaranteed not to have heard of any of those games before you have gone to E3. But there really aren't that many little games there. Mafia is going to take up a few hundred square feet. Final Fantasy is going to take up a few hundred square feet, and there are these big chunks. It's actually very difficult, other than those exceptions of Indiecade and the few little things that are connected to a Sony or a Microsoft. It's hard to find a small game there.
Was there anything in particular that sort of caught your eye this year, as far as new releases, new announcements, or games that were on show?
The thing that actually really got me was the Sony press conference that happened the day before the first day of E3. I mean, it got me because I'm a music and sound guy, and I was actually really surprised to see that they had a live orchestra there. And they started playing without anything going on, and then about 5 minutes later, you had the new God of War showing, and it was not a trailer; it was a playable demo there, and the orchestra was playing along. Actually, the new composer for the series, Bear McCreary, he of Battlestar Galactica fame and whatnot, he was actually conducting the orchestra, and it was actually kind of cool. And it turned out that they were going to do this for the entire Sony press conference. I found out later from some developer friends that Sony had actually requested from various developers whether they were showing an actual demo on stage or a trailer to actually make the game, make the dev build game, or make the trailer without music.
Oh, wow.
So that the orchestra would play along everything that was going on. And I thought that was actually really cool. But I also felt a little bit weird about it because it's almost like the music is no longer part of the game, because it actually isn't part of the game. Those assets are no longer in that game that's playing on that dev PS4 or whatnot.
Right.
So it's like, it felt a little weird. It was really cool seeing the music highlighted in that way, though.
I kind of feel... Were you actually at the press conference, Mike?
I just watched it.
Okay.
I watched video highlights.
I didn't... it might have been just me, but I felt that the live mixing of the orchestra was a little kind of dry compared to... You had these trailers with this big kind of booming... virtual orchestras, or what people are using, and then all of a sudden we cut to the real orchestra, and it just sort of sounds really dry. And if you're actually there, without doubt, it would be extremely impressive, I'm sure. But I don't know, the mixing sort of caught me. It's like, whoa, okay, here we are. Here's the real orchestra. Where's my native instrument, storm drum? whatever storm drum is. Yeah, I also watched at Vitae. We watched the press conference as well. And I have one strong opinion, which I'm going to share with you guys, just confidentially. Does anybody know anybody who works in the sound department at Guerrilla Games? No?
No, I actually.
Is there anybody out there who works for Guerrilla Games who's watching? No?
Or the chat room?
Good. So since last year, I've been following Horizon Zero Dawn, simply because visually it looks really, really impressive. Somehow there's something about it that, at least for me, I find very appealing, sort of like the Dinobots from the Transformers kind of thing, with some really... just the visual design of it is very, very impressive. And as when I was in university, I studied a bit of anthropology. This kind of sort of... that level of detail in creating an unreal culture and an unreal sort of what's the right word? Just sort of a new world, basically, a parallel world in a different culture. That level of detail, at least visually, is really, really wonderful. The music, the sound, great. It looks great. The voice acting, great. The dialogue, not great.
The writing.
Not great. Yeah, the actual what the character is saying. And here's the simple problem. Here's the simple thing which kind of catches me every time. Last year when I was watching the trailer and I looked at it, I thought, wow, it looks great. It sounds great. Wow, I really want to play this. This year it came up again. Wow, it looks great. I want to play it. The dialogue. There's one single thing that sort of gets me every time, is that it's far too modern. The way that she's speaking, some of the phrases that she says are clearly modern day. So, for example, there was an example last year which I've forgotten, which is not very helpful, but there was an example this year. So she's running around, and I think she was trying to set up some kind of trap or something like that, and she says something like, "There we go, that'll do it. That'll do it." So if you are if this is hyper future or parallel universe future, and we're talking about, an ancient or hyper-futuristic culture, completely separate, completely self-contained, full of all of this wonderful detail in this beautiful world, is it likely that the character would use that kind of sort of idiomatic expression like, "That'll do it"? I think there was another, last year it was something like, "I can see this is going to be a hell of a day," or something like that. It's like really, it was something like that. I think I can see this is going to be a hell of a day. Again, it's the same thing that, they've gone to that degree of making this thing so consistent and so kind of from a holistic point of view, so well defined. Yet the language that they use just doesn't fit for me. That'll do it. It's going to be a hell of a day. These things just sort of seem so much our world and not their world. So that was one thing I felt this year that was just caught me. Did you guys know? Does anybody else notice that, or is it just me?
No, I felt you on that. I mean, if it is going to be that far in the future, then certainly language will change. I mean, in the space of a century, we see language change. I wish I could think of a really good American English example, but I remember one of my Japanese friends was actually remarking to me about this anime series called Gakuen Senki Muryo. Not really particularly popular, but it came out in America, and he said, "Oh yeah, the English dub doesn't really do justice to what the scriptwriters were doing, because the world was set about 100 years in the future, 2100, and they were really trying their best to predict this is how the Japanese language is going to change over that time. These are the idioms that people will use now. This is how young people will speak, and these are how the older people will speak, which will be more connected to where they once were, which is closer to the way that we currently speak, and sort of remarking on the difference between how characters speak, and it's such an important part. In 100 years, surely we see that happening. We know how our parents talk. What happens after 10, 50, or 100 generations, in this post-apocalyptic type world. And I would like to see more people actually put some more care into that.
One movie that always comes to mind when it comes to really excellent sort of alternate universe or hyperfuture dialogue is James Cameron's Aliens. That movie, the dialogue is, I'm not just talking about game over, man. Not that. I mean, if you listen to what they're saying, especially the military speak that they're throwing around each other, it's sort of its current world slightly extended. So you can listen to it and you can understand what they're saying. But they're sort of they drop little hints here and there that wait a moment, that we wouldn't say that, but I can kind of get what they're saying, which sort of gives it a very timeless quality. And doesn't sort of ground it in a particular kind of culture, or it sort of makes it more flexible to take on this character of the world that they've created there. So I sort of felt it was a bit of a shame with this case that there's a bit too much of this idiomatic expression, which just seems really disjointed to me. Let's have a look. We've got some comments in the chat room. The legendary Dan Reynolds is saying, do you translate your games? Why would you translate the game if you wanted linguistic authenticity? There will always be idiomatic expressions that will be lost in that translation. So hold on. This game, the original dialogue is in English, surely? Or is it actually in Dutch or in French or German or what? I would imagine the original dialogue is in English, right?
I mean, it's developed there, at least.
Right, I mean, because Guerrilla Games is in Utrecht or in Amsterdam, I think.
Oh,
Amsterdam,
is it?
I think. Yeah, because they're Dutch.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Yeah, translation is it's a really, really difficult thing, and it's really important. I remember when we were working with Sony on the translation of the Modern Zombie Taxi Company, it was really important to have the Japanese stuff come over, making sure that they're not translating the words per se, but they're translating the intentions, whilst giving a grounding in the world that we've created. So it's really important for them to understand this is the world that this is in, so that they can make a judgment themselves about whether or not it's likely that somebody would say something like this or something like that. I don't know, and there must be a lot of context and technical backstory, and of course, development backstory behind the dialogue, which I'm not aware of, and I'm sure there might be good reasons why they're choosing to voice it like that. Yeah, so another long comment from Dan Reynolds. Let's read this. Let's say you're translating a poem about Japanese rice peasants from feudal Japan for 1930s Americans. Translating a poem about Japanese rice peasants from feudal Japan for 1930s Americans. Do you try to express the plight of a rice farmer, or do you translate it wheat farmers in the Dust Bowl? Translation is as much about the source as it is about the audience. If the audience is a modern English-speaking audience, then you are writing for that language. That's a tough one, isn't it? I'm not sure that I agree with that. I think that just like with music, how do you think this can also apply? We're getting into a really dangerous, thin ice discussion here. But if you know that your audience, this is your specific audience, like for example, say you're making a fighting game, so you know that your audience, for example, expects to have heavy metal in their fighting game, for example, right? So
like rhodium, or what sort of heavy? Okay, heavy metal. I see.
Well, that kind of genre is what somebody's expecting to get out of a fighting game, for example, right? So, do you write your music specifically for that audience, for that expectation, or something that's easily understandable for that audience? Or do you stretch it in a different direction to try and add a new flavor to things?
Well, I think what's being discussed isn't so much deciding whether you want to roll with the what precedes you when writing for a particular genre. I think the real question is if you're jumping across cultures where there may be a unique set of associations musically or linguistically, how much do you want to accommodate what's normal in that culture? Leaving aside or leaving orthogonal the issue of what's normal for a genre of game. So they're related but distinct issues.
I think though that if you look at visually what the game is trying to do, and at least from the context of the story and the I guess the anthropological kind of backbone of what the game is, it seems to me that they are trying to express this feeling of foreignness, that this is not our world, this is a future version of our world, or it's a parallel universe kind of our world, where you have these massive, Dinobot robots wandering around, and this sort of, what's the right word? Hyper primitive, sort of pseudo-technologically advanced, technologically primitive society. So if they're trying to create this sort of immersive sense of foreignness, then I would imagine that a really key way to go that extra step is to get a calculated modicum of foreignness into the language as well. So instead of just translating it directly to sort of modern-day 2016 American English, why not go for something that is completely separate from that? Just like the way that it looks, you don't have the main character wandering around in jeans and a t-shirt. She's wandering around in a costume that clearly looks like it's come from a sort of a foreign culture, or like an exotic fantasy culture. So it just seems to me that language that fits that sense of foreignness is the obvious choice in this case.
Yeah, it's tough. Sorry, Michael.
Okay, I'll do a real short comment. I was going to think that we might speculate that an ambitious game might make an artificial language, there's an entire language just for their world, and have all the translations be subtitles, like as if you turned on the dialogue subtitles options. And this is a little bit of playful speculation, but I wonder if that might not create a stronger sense of immersion if you're hearing the actors voice words emotionally, but in a language that you can't understand.
I think that's what The Last Guardian is doing, isn't it? Because The Last Guardian has the character of the child, the language of the child is not English, it's foreign. I think they do that.
I think you're right.
Yeah, all of those games in that series have used some sort of constructed language.
Mm.
Yeah, it's tough, that combination, because yes, the foreignness is definitely perceived by us as the viewer or as the player, but any of the dialogue that's happening in that world should not be unfamiliar to the character that you are playing in that world. So, it should be familiar. If someone else, some NPC, some important character, an antagonist wants to express something to the character, well, it needs to be expressed in a a more or less similar way to you as the player as well.
Yeah,
and that can be tough.
That's true, but I think what we're talking about here is if you take sort of neutral English, to me, the Horizon Zero Dawn dialogue goes beyond neutral English into slightly sort of stylized English with a modern tone, like it's going to be a hell of a day, or that'll do it, or things like that, right? So I probably should get my quotes correct, because maybe it was something like it's going to be a hell of a day, but I don't remember exactly what it was. But that's sort of going beyond neutral. Pulling it back to neutral, as in, no, like instead of it's going to be a hell of a day, say something like, something like, this is not going very well. I guess it becomes very dry, very flat, but it's entirely possible to sort of slightly stretch in the direction of foreignness whilst keeping it wholly understandable and comprehensible, especially in an action game kind of context. And that's where, that script to Aliens does it so well that you know exactly what they're saying. And you can watch it now, and you can watch it in 1989, 9, whenever it came out, and it sort of has that same feeling about it, and it's completely timeless just because it's taken neutral but stretched it in a sort of a different stylistic direction, but not too far, just a little bit so that you can really still understand what they're saying. That's the direction that I think that they should have gone with Horizon Zero Dawn. Instead of sort of take neutral, make it slightly modern so that it's approachable and easily understandable from a modern audience. Instead of going that way, if they're going to go in any direction, I feel that they should have gone in a direction that felt like it had its place in this foreign world.
I'm inclined to agree, and I almost wonder if there isn't a fear of alienating younger gamers, given that the age demographic for many games today is so wide. They may have felt that they needed to throw a slow ball insofar as comprehensibility is concerned and familiarity. And it may also be that in worlds where so much is exotic and alien, that there might be a thought that, well, let's give a couple of contemporary idioms just to give people something familiar to grab hold of. I'm imagining an explanation. I actually agree with you, Alex. I think a little bit of diction that suggests another culture is great, and idioms are a little bit, they can take you out of the moment, but I'm trying to imagine what the motivation might be.
Yeah, I mean, for such a high quality project with some brilliant people behind it, there's got to be a very good explanation why they decided to do that. It's not just a case of, oh, that'll do. I'm sure that they sat down and thought, right, here are alternatives. Let's go with this. So I'd be really interested to know what that reasoning behind that was. But I get maybe also it's just a subjective personal opinion that I have is when I watch the trailer, this gameplay demo this time as well, I thought, oh no, and here I was just sort of feeling this character in this foreign land, and all of a sudden, that'll do it. It's like I'm ordering a hot dog. So
yeah.
Anyway,
another interesting issue is one of accents, and I think to an American ear, we associate antiquity with kind of like British accents or UK accents, or anything that predates the United States feels more natural to us. And we can also we can accept a kind of mid-Atlantic American actor, kind of sort of sounding English, assuming it's a historical context or something like that. But I personally can find contemporary American accents a little jarring in a fantasy or historical context, even if the dialogue is written in a way that's appropriate for the period.
Well, obviously not coming from America and not growing up around that kind of linguistic context, other than in mass media, I couldn't agree more, really. I mean, just for me, the American accent to me has a certain, but again, it depends on the voice actor as well, because of course you have some people with classic American accents, which can sound, wonderfully, what's the right word? Anyway, suitable for this kind of fantasy setting. But yeah, I think that the issue of accents as well, that's also a tough one. You get a British accent in there, and automatically that's going to steer you in a sort of a certain direction. This is the reason why we don't have Australian accents in games. Have you noticed that? There's actually no Australian accents in any game ever.
Ever?
No, never, ever, 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 never.
Not even those
Mad Max game that came out this year, right?
It's because it will drive the game in a certain direction, and that's down. and out. Did you know that there were two versions of the original Mad Max made? There was an Australian English version and an American English version. And
what, really?
in Japan, when you buy if you rent the DVD, well, back when I rented the DVD, who rents DVDs these days? This was like 10 years ago, so spare me. But yeah, you can switch between the dialogue tracks. There's like on the back it says in Japanese American English version, Australian English version, and then Japanese dub version. And actually, the Australian English version is actually Mel Gibson in his proper accent. So I guess what happened was they made him redub it later into an American English accent so that it'd be easier for the American audience to understand, because who understands the way we speak, really? Seriously.
What was that?
What did he say?
In that particular movie, there was something about the kind of post-apocalyptic wasteland that I think works well for the Australian accent, since your people live on a giant, inhospitable-to-life island with a few settlements carved out on the rim, right? So
exactly.
I kind of like that element there. But you're right, there aren't many games that make use of that, except perhaps if there's some that are literally in Australia.
Yeah, so there's a good reason for that. And there's also a reason why you don't hear Australian accents that much in movies. Well, I guess you do to a certain extent. So I quite liked Russell Crowe in Gladiator. In Ridley Scott, it's Gladiator. Yeah, Russell. He talks in his natural Australian accent. For me, it was great because Russell Crowe, from being from the Eastern Seaboard states, he doesn't really talk like this. Yeah, going up to the end of the sentence, going like this. Yeah. So on my signal, unleash hell. So we're gonna fight these Germans. I guess they're Germans, aren't they? Yeah. No, he doesn't talk like that. But he has a sort of a natural, neutral Australian accent, which gives a sort of at least for me, in an American Hollywood movie, it gives a sort of a rough edge to things, which sort of sounded really good. Anyway, speaking of sounding really good, let's take this moment to thank our wonderful, wonderful sponsor, Isotope. There was a nice little Johnson segue in there. Isotope, the maker of such fine software instruments, software plugins, such as, let's read them, Ozone, and we've got Iris, and we've got, what's the one that Kyle always uses? RX?
RX. And the RX Advanced Editor.
Plenty of, Ozone, I think, may be fast becoming the standard for, what would we call it, prosumer mastering plugins, I guess. Prosumer in the sense that you're not actually a professional mastering engineer with your table of outboard. You notice that mastering engineers always have like this sort of very interesting looking desk where it's just like 2 rows of just knobs. If you don't have that, then get Isotope stuff, because it's really good.
We should probably run this copy by them sometime. If you're not a professional and you don't have the really expensive good gear, then buy the products of our sponsor.
It is sort of true in the sense of it's kind of amazing how fast you can go with some of Isotope's stuff. It's you can dig down really deep when you need to, and often you do, but it's also really quite quick to get 90% there, because it's really easy to use. I like how easy a lot of Isotope stuff is to use, and that includes even the really advanced stuff like the RX Advanced Editor.
Indeed. While we're on this point of plugins, let's take a slight excursion into. We've just come out of a sweaty kind of boxing ring of talking about dialogue and anthropological context. Let's jump into something nice and safe and easy, like plugins that Michael Shapiro likes.
Well, that's my favorite topic. How nice of you to introduce it at this juncture in the show. So, ladies and gentlemen, our original topic before this pleasant digression was plugins of recent memory that we love, or that we've been using, that we wanted to tell everybody about. And I think all of us here today have one or more treasures that we would like to share with our audience. And Kyle, somewhere listening to the show on his phone, is probably jumping up and down. with excitement, hoping to share many, many more plugins than we're going to describe here. So perhaps it's for the best that we picked this topic when Kyle wasn't around. Just kidding, Kyle. So I've got a couple to talk about, but I'll just start with one, and then I'll pass the torch since we've only got a half an hour. I was introduced to this really great EQ plugin, or rather a pair of related EQ plugins by Kyle. And this is I guess it's a family of two. It's a micro family of EQ plugins that are software emulations of hardware units. And the hardware units are called the MAAG EQ2 and EQ4, and that's spelled MAAG, the last name of the designer, I believe. And I've been using the software implementations of these, the licensed software implementations that are offered by Plugin Alliance, which is at plugin-alliance.com. So you got all that. So to recap, the hardware units were made by MAAG, and then Plugin Alliance licensed those hardware designs, and they've made the much more affordable software versions of those plugins. So what the MAAG EQ2 and 4 are specialized plugins that are meant to supplement the jack-of-all-trades all-purpose EQ that comes with your DAW. So whereas the DAW is kind of everything's, you can do a little bit of everything with your DAW EQ. You can cut, you can boost, you can get color, you can do corrective EQ. The EQ2 and 4 are for occasions when you want a particular kind of sound in a particular register. So the first thing you'll notice if you head on over to pluginalliance.com and look at the imagery for these two is that they are kind of picture perfect. The interfaces are picture perfect imitations, or I guess I should say recreations, of the hardware's front panel. So you're looking at digital knobs. There's no graphic display of the signal. You're not looking at the familiar curves. You're just seeing a bunch of knobs and a little peak indicator to let you know if you've gone too far. And I'll start with EQ4 to make it a little more concrete. What the EQ4 is offering you are a collection of bands that can, I believe they're exclusively boostable bands. So this is when you're going to add something. Actually, that's not entirely true, but most of them are boost-only bands. So what you have in the EQ4 are a number of boostable peak filters, or bell-shaped filters. There's one at 650 hertz. So you've got the low mids. There's one at 160 hertz, kind of bass partials territory. You've got one down at 40 hertz, and then insanely you've got a sub frequency band at 10 hertz. And that's obviously below, interpreted literally, that's below what we're supposed to be able to hear. And on the top side, you've got a sweepable, boostable shelf EQ that can be set to one of a number of different frequency bands. And since it's a shelf EQ, you're boosting that frequency and above. And that starts at 2.5 and it goes all the way up to 40. So once again, we have a case where we're looking at frequencies that seem to be beyond the threshold of human perception. And at first blush, you might say, well, I couldn't hear 20 kilohertz on a good day. Why am I boosting 40? So it's kind of an interesting looking unit just on the face of it. What makes the EQ2 and 4 interesting is that they supposedly are using proprietary formulas that allow you to boost frequencies without the distortion that usually comes along with frequency boosts. This is a little beyond my ken, but I believe it's called phase shift distortion, and it's just a natural byproduct of doing any kind of EQ boost under normal circumstances. So MAAG claims their system will avoid that kind of distortion and give you a crystal clear sound, a very glassy, sort of shimmery, clear, transparent sound, whether you're doing a low boost or high boost. And I can't personally claim to evaluate their secret formula, but I can say that the high-end boost on that sweepable filter, what they call the air band, I believe, or the air gain, sounds great. You're getting a very clean, shimmery, glassy kind of enhancement to the upper partials. The EQ4 is, I guess, used a lot in pop vocals when you want to have that kind of glistering, shimmery sound in the air range, and apparently that's one of its raisons d'etre. But as you can imagine, that kind of high-end shelf works really well on strings, or even in judicious amounts, the whole mix. And I've been experimenting it, and I find that it gives this kind of wonderfully transparent glow or glisten or whatever your favorite visual acoustic metaphor is. I have not used the other bands as much, the 160 hertz, etc. But I've watched a couple of YouTube testimonials from engineers who've been playing around with the unit. And they say that it allows you to add a little bit of extra dB at frequency bands where you normally might even be cutting for clarity. But since there's so much clarity in this unit, you can actually add a little bit and for color or flavor. And so I've heard, for example, an engineer said, normally if you look at the, I think it was the 160 band, he said, like, this is something in vocals I've normally cut, but here I add a little bit for thickness and power, and it comes through very nicely. And likewise, for looking at that crazy 10 hertz sub, whatever you'd call it, the depths of the underworld sound. Obviously, you wouldn't want to add that if you had a noisy room recording, but if you're starting with something that's already very clean in the low end, like a sample of a kick drum or something, and you want to give it this oomph, that'll be perceptible on big speakers or in a big mix. I've heard that can be really useful. So speaking not as a super duper high tech head like Kyle is, I've just found experimentally that the airband is great for strings and a mix, and it's just a really useful plugin. There's a variant called the EQ2, which you might actually find a little more useful. It offers another frequency band to the high end. You also get 15K, which is very useful when you're adding a little bit of shimmer. And instead of a couple of fixed bands, it gives you some sweepable options. So it doesn't give you quite everything that the EQ4 does, but it gives you more flexibility. So if you had to pick one, I would go with the EQ2, which is a little bit pricier, but I think it's worth it. And speaking of price, the EQ4 is mere $99, at least last time I looked. I don't think that was a sale price. I think that's their new regular price, but feel free to correct me on that. And at last glance, the EQ2 is $150. So again, this is not a replacement for the EQ on your DAW. It's much more specialized, but it is nice to have a couple of bands just ready to go that will be subtly and clearly enhanced with a couple of dB here or there, rather than the process of calling up the super parametric, can do anything under the sun, graphically intensive EQ on Logic or Pro Tools, what you're doing, and kind of reinventing the wheel every time as you call up a preset or drag a curve exactly to this spot, and you get a little tired and you're like, yeah, that's close enough, and all this imprecision is suddenly in your workflow. It's nice to have just something ready to go at 10K or 15K and knowing it's going to sound good. So there's a strange freeing element, I find, of having a bunch of pre-baked bands and not being able to do everything. So I like these. I have both of these guys. If you had to pick one, I'd say just get the EQ2 because you're not missing out on a whole lot from the EQ4, and it's worth it for the high end, honestly, in my opinion. Yeah, so this gets enthusiastic 2 thumbs up for me.
Yeah, I actually have EQ4 as well. I think I remember talking about it a few episodes ago, but obviously that wasn't enough to convince you. It needed Carl to come over and say, right, Mike, this plugin, now, buy, okay, use. Yeah, EQ, it's great. It's I use it primarily, solely on synths and synthetic stuff, so I come from the other end of the picture. And in that situation, the airband is not as useful for whatever reason. Whether it's to do with the way that these synthesizers are working. However, the other bands, yeah, this kind of sort of notched, because the knobs don't work in analog, they are notched, just like the real version would be where it's going click, 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 click. You could say that, well, this is software, like they should at least make an option where you can freely sweep these things if you want, but the notched version, it makes it really quick, and it's really, really hard to make it sound bad. That's the amazing thing about these kinds of about the Maag EQ series. The other ones that Dan Renzels just mentioned in the in the chat room for this kind of parametric hardware emulation type is the PSP Audio's S-Quad series. So they have there's Noble Q, which is like a Poltec, and they have let's see, what are the other ones? Actually, I've got them all here right in front of me. They've got Precursor, they've got Noble Q, McQ, which is MCI Desk Classic Q, which I think is a Neve something or other, Retro Q. They're all exactly the same kind of thing, where you just have the interface with some knobs in front of you and you just go for it. It's great for sort of shaping a character, which is the Marg I find much more subtle, and it's hard to make it sound bad. You know, every one of the knobs and every one of the positions of every one of the knobs just gives you a different character, and it's just which character that you want to choose, really. Where the PSP ones are much more flexible, and the flip side of that is that it's quite easy to ruin something with those. Yeah, for me, the plugins that I've been getting, I was just having a look at my plugin folder, sorted by recently added. I got speaking of PSP, I got their Spring Reverb plugin called Springbox. It was going on sale and it was really cheap, and I thought, Spring Reverb, you know, I'm a synth guy. Like, how far away can you possibly get from, you know, synthesizers than Spring Reverb, which has that classic kind of wah-wah-wah kind of sound that you expect from certain guitar tones from certain genres, right? It's great. It's really great. It's such an unexpected, refreshing kind of different thing to have a synthesizer tone going through a Spring Reverb. The Springbox, I think because, you know, the classic kind of, you know, you shake the Spring Reverb and you get that kind of springy boing kind of sound that we've all heard before. That sound, when you have it in the context of a sort of a thickly layered synthesizer in a track, it sort of creates like these little bits of kind of like, you know, stuff that we would do with modulating a filter with an LFO or with a looped envelope or something, but with, you know, getting sort of little resonant peaks here and there in the sound. So when it's laid into a big thicker mix, it sounds really great. The other interesting feature that PSP Springbox has, which is I've never seen on a reverb, and I've actually, in some of the reviews that I've read of Springbox, people have said, you know, why would you bother doing that? It actually has two modes. It's like an A mode and a B mode, and there's a switch in the middle to switch between A and B, and A and B have just independent settings that you can set them to. So it's basically two reverb units that you can switch between. I really don't understand why they thought that would be useful. I mean, is it because they thought that, you know, people would want to sort of audition one setting and then switch to the other and try another one? You do get, I mean, obviously other plugins, they have like an A-B comparison mode with a little thing usually above the graphic user interface. In the case of the PSP one, it's actually part of the unit. It's like they want you to switch between these two modes. What I found, though, is that especially for synth stuff, for like rhythmic stuff, techno and stuff like that, you just modulate the switch between the two reverbs in time with the song using automation, or like an LFO or something in Renoise if you're doing it or whatever. And then you just set one to be really, really super wet, and the other one to be much more kind of focused and tight, more about sort of reflections. And you get this really cool kind of rhythmic effect from that, because the reverb is sort of switching in and out. So, I mean, I don't really know why they added that feature in there, but that's a really cool little thing that you can do there. And one more that I just want to say before we go to Vince is Sonic Charge's Permutate. It's Permute 8. And if you haven't seen Permutate, if you haven't seen Permutate, don't watch it now, because the trailer is very, 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 what's the word? Oh, geez. Takes all of your attention away from this wonderful show that you're watching right now. Distracting. Yeah. Immersive, I guess. Don't watch it now, watch it later. Permutate is a bit crusher, essentially. It's a bit crusher delay. And if you just go and have a look at the screenshot, it's Permute, P-E-R-M-U-T, and then the number 8. If you go and look at a screenshot, yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's a delay bit crusher that actually has a terminal emulation inside it. And you can start up the terminal emulation and play Zork. Well, it's actually not Zork. It's called Adventure, but it's basically Zork inside the plugin. Great. Like, why would you ever want that? You can also, like, there's like a README file in there, and you can sort of less README, or is it more? Well, I think it has echo README or something like that, just to make it a bit more simple. And then you get like the sort of ASCII picture of the person who created it. I mean, it's actually, it also sounds good, and you can get different firmware sort of cartridges that plug into it. Sonic Charge have a great knack for making plugins that sort of are more than just Sonic tools. They're a little bit entertaining as well. And yeah, I don't know. It's gimmicky, I guess is the word. But then so is Sausage Fattener, and a lot of people are still using Sausage Fattener. Permutate, it just sounds really good, and it's great for sort of mangling sounds, and of course doing rhythmic, gated sort of delay effects and effects with bit crushing and stuff like that. So that's another one that I would highly recommend. Vince.
Yo, man, really, Zork? I don't know. I'm actually kind of reminded of not a new one. I'll get to a new one later on, but an older thing called Arcane. I think it was called Arcane by Embertone, which is actually a Contact library. But when you load it into Contact, you have to actually play these games in order to unlock the other different libraries and patches within that library. So okay, if you go to this part, you unlock the percussion instrument. And you're doing it in a sort of Myst style puzzle adventure mode, and I thought that was absolutely ridiculous. And there was part of me that was super happy that you could do something with that, and actually kind of inspired me for a very short while to really dive into Contact scripting. And then there was another part of me that was so happy when a week later they just, okay, here are the actual patches. Just go ahead and load them. Don't worry. Here's a new NKI file. Stop bugging us about how dumb this game was. But moving on to something that's a little bit more modern. I know it's not a plugin. It's, again, a Contact library, but it is brand new. It came out just a few weeks ago by a nice, small little Contact developer called Impact Soundworks, known throughout the game audio community because it has dudes like Andrew Aversa and other game audio guys working there developing some cool sounds. The thing is called Super Audio Kart. A little riff on Super Mario Kart, I guess, and it has that Super Nintendo red logo. And I have half a mind that says, man, this is dumb. Because there are already so many other things that you could do for a lot of retro sounds. Despite the Super Audio Kart sort of link, it's actually for all types of retro video game systems. So the Mega Drive, the NES, the old Atari Pokey, if you want. And they do it in Contact style, which means it's all samples. Lots and lots of samples. And it sounds good, but it's not the process that you go about in order to make these retro sounds. And I have lots of plugins for that. I mean, if I really wanted to be super authentic, I would do VOPM, the virtual OPM plugin, and actually design this OPM synth chip. Yeah, I'm actually going to be driving with my DAW and have authentic OPM sounds if I really want to get a Genesis sound or an ad-lib sound or whatnot. But I can't hate Super Audio Kart because it's so easy and it's so good sounding. It really does sound good. And it's so frustrating to me how easy it is because I do have a lot of pride in, okay, I'm going to design these sounds this way. I'm going to turn on PD. I'm going to use VOPM or YMCK or all these more authentic ways of doing it. But it's just too easy. It's too easy to make something that sounds good with Super Audio Kart that actually reflects a Sega Genesis style or a Super Nintendo style or what have you. So that was the thing that I've been playing with and just struggling with coming to grips with what my real feelings are about over the last few weeks.
Cool. I'll have to check that out. So specifically for the objective of the library is for making retro game sounds, or just retro chiptune kind of sounds in general, or what?
Yeah, that's certainly the easiest thing, you know. So it's actual samples of, you know, the NES and the Game Boy, and actually there's like Commodore 64 patches in there that you could load up, and you load these things up into layers, and you could blend between these various sounds. So if you want a mix of a sort of an Atari sound with a little bit of an NES sound, you know, you can do that by blending these layers of patches that you load in. And it sounds good. It's basically, you know, whatever game system from the 80s or 90s.
Mike,
Yeah.
I believe he mentioned the Commodore word. I think he's trying to drop the. I think he's trying to persuade us to get this.
But no, but that's the thing, you know, it's a sample of that SID chip, you know, and that feels weird to me. You know, I'm not sure how to truly feel about this. Part of me wants to hate it, but I can't really hate it. Part of me wants to just, you know, like it because it sounds good, but I can't really like it either because the process is not there, and I connect the process so much to the achieving of the sound. You know what I mean?
Right.
Imagine if you were porting a classic game, you know, like Mule or something, and you perhaps wanted to have a retro audio mode. It might be handy to have something that could approximate the sound of the SID chip or the Genesis or whatever else, so you could have as authentic a recreation of that sound. I'd feel like put upon to try to imagine other uses for that technology, but for that particular vibe, it seems like it might be handy.
Yeah. I mean, it could definitely work that way. I mean, if I was trying to do a version of an existing track. Okay, I got to load a bass drum. Well, let's see. I got to craft this bass drum. Let me just. Okay, I'm gonna feed this oscillator into this oscillator. I need this thing. Okay, this is going a little bit too fast. Oh, I totally messed with the pitch on that. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Here, I'm just going to load up Genesis bass drum. Let's try another one. Let's try another one. Let's try another one. Let's try another one. Okay, there's the perfect bass drum. Let's move on.
Yeah, it's like it's the same argument like we're using presets versus rolling your own sounds, or even, you know, recording your own sounds versus using stuff from a, you know, a high quality sound library for your sound effects in the game. All of which are excellent topics for next week.
Oh, next week.
Because we have reached the end of the show. Guys.
Oh, let's see. Matt Hoffman in the channel does say Audio Cart is set to have expansions coming out. They'll be adding more systems and sound samples. Oh man, what else are they going to add? Are they going to add the Intellivision or something? What are they going to add?
Kyle would get excited over that.
Oh, uh-oh.
He said the Kyle word, the K word.
Yeah, well, he does.
You know, if you say his name 3 times.
Maybe he'll suddenly join if we say Kyle.
Oh.
No. He's taking a sip of his scotch right now, saying, well, it's time to wrap up, guys. So, this has been the Game Audio Hour, 106. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you did enjoy the show, please subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, join our circle on Google+, subscribe to our non-existent email newsletter.
Pin us on Pinterest.
Maybe pin us on Pinterest, or maybe hook us up on your. See, that's the thing. That's the reason why RSS is dying, because there's no way to say RSS us, our, which I don't think actually works. So don't try RSS. But
you could or us on Orchid.
Yes, you could LO us on Elo if that still exists. Remember Elo? That came and went.
Yes, Elo.
Came and went. Okay, guys. Well, it's been a great show, and we trust that next time our fantabulous leader, Kyle Johnson, will be back with us in fine health. Let's hope for the best. All the best, Kyle, if you're listening. And I guess we'll see all of you fine, beautiful people next week.
All right.
Thanks for tuning in. See you again. See you next time. Bye.